Have you ever flown before? If you have, you're probably familiar with all the different rules of flying. But in case you haven't, I'm gonna share with you a few of my least favorite rules that you gotta follow. The first is you have to show up super early. Not just 15 to 20 minutes early, but sometimes 3 or 4 hours early. And then you have to go through security where they look at all your stuff and you've got to take off your shoes and your hat and sometimes even your belt. And you're not even allowed to bring your own water. If you want water on that flight, you're gonna have to buy water at the airport, and it is twice as expensive at the airport. This is James. He wrote a book in the Bible that says a lot about rules. And he's got a famous brother too, Jesus. Yeah, that one. After Jesus rose from the dead, James dove headfirst into spreading the good news of Jesus. He even became a leader of the church in Jerusalem, a faith community made up entirely of Jewish people who began to follow Jesus. James grew up in a Jewish culture with a ton of religious rules. There were obvious ones like don't kill anyone, but then there were hundreds of other rules too, like don't wear clothes made up of different kinds of fabrics. Oops. And also, if you find an ox on the side of the road, stop what you're doing right there and take it back to its owner immediately. And of course, say goodbye to bacon and shrimp. Yes, bacon, because those foods were considered unclean. Maybe it seems weird that God would give us all these rules, but he did have a purpose. Some rules kept the Jewish people safe and healthy, and others set them apart from different nations. Some taught them how to live peacefully with each other, and many rules helped them connect with God. See, these rules served a purpose. But after Jesus showed up, the Jewish people who followed Jesus began to realize that a lot of things had changed. And because Jesus had made things right between them and God, they weren't required to follow all these rules anymore. Or were they? See, James wrote a letter to help us explain. We can find that letter in James 1, verses 22 to 25. He says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself, he goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever intently looks into the perfect laws that have given freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do." When Jesus was still on earth, he introduced his followers to a new rule that would take place of all the hundreds of old rules that were before it. And listen, this new rule changed everything. Jesus shared this new rule when he was being interrogated by religious leaders who just loved rules. Imagine that, people who loved rules. These leaders were passionate about following every detail of the Jewish law, thinking it would make them holy and loved by God. So when these leaders asked Jesus to name the most important law, they were expecting him to name a law that they knew. But Jesus gave them a brand new law instead. In Matthew 22, 35 to 40, it says, "One of them, an expert of the law, tested him with this question. 'Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?' And Jesus replied, 'Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All laws and the prophets hang on these two commandments." So what does this law look like in our everyday lives? First, let's talk about something that we can all relate to, whether you're following Jesus or not. Then we'll talk about what that means for a relationship with God. First, let's talk about what it means to love others. See, we've mentioned a lot of rules up until this point, and a lot of them feel restrictive and unreasonable and maybe even a little unfair. But what if we thought about those rules differently? Instead of telling our parents how stupid this curfew is and there's no way I'm gonna follow it, and maybe even thinking that they're stupid for making you have a curfew, what if you asked this? How can I love my parents better? See, maybe coming home earlier lets them go to sleep instead of them having to stay up and worry about where you are. Next, let's talk about love God. Jesus' rule of loving others is a helpful way to make decisions, no matter what you believe. But Jesus gave us the law of love for a reason that's bigger than just being kind to each other. Above all, Jesus wants us to love God. So if we're following God ever makes you feel caged instead of free, what if you asked, how do God's rules help me love God more? How do they help me stay close to God? How do they give me chances to love God by loving others? How do these rules give me a chance to trust and obey God, even when I don't understand? Over the next few weeks, we're going to talk a lot about the relationship between rules and freedom. Believe it or not, rules and freedom have a lot in common. But we really needed to start here with the law of love. God's law sets us free to love God, others, and ourselves. Don't ever forget about that one. God's law helps us to see that no matter what we've done, God's love for us never fails. Although there will always be rules that we don't like and don't agree with and you don't really understand, the right rules can set you free. And according to Jesus, the greatest rule is love.